Please feel free to stand or remain seated as you are comfortable for this time of prayer. Almighty God, by the hand of Moses, your servant, you led your people out of slavery and made them free at last. Grant that your church, your community here gathered, following in the example of your prophet Martin Luther King and so many other witnesses and prophets that have gone before us, may resist oppression in the name of your love, and may strive to secure for all your children the blessed liberty of the gospel of Christ. And let us remember and honor this day and commemorate Juneteenth and the legacy that we have left to take up for each and every person, so that we may be a community united across all kinds of divisions, that we, no matter the color of our skin, where we come from, how we think, that we may be a people of God, a community where we can walk hand in hand and love one another as you love us. All this we pray through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen.
Those words certainly communicate what we hope this entire program will be about. As I said, I am Lola Brayshaw, and I'm president of Movement Mindset. And on behalf of the board of directors, the chairpersons, and their committees who organized tonight's event, and all of the members of Movement Mindset, it is my pleasure to welcome you here to our annual Juneteenth Commemoration program. We hope that you will find the program interesting, informative, and inspirational. In your program, there is a brief description of the history of Juneteenth. While June 19, 1865 is known as Freedom Day, it did not prove to be Equality Day. The formerly enslaved people, now newly free, had no way of knowing what would come next. A very daunting future lay ahead of them. And in the film this evening, you will witness the challenges they faced and the resilience that sustained them. And yet, here we are today, in 2025, still fighting for equality and equity. Because of this, the theme of tonight's program, Freedom's Unfinished Journey, from Juneteenth to today's struggle for inclusive history, is so timely. In 2025, the current President of the United States signed an executive order ending DEI programs and preferencing. As we know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those policies are tools to uplift people of color, women, LGBTQ+ individuals, and other marginalized groups. These programs and policies that were designed to equalize and to expand access and protection are being restricted, and in many cases dismantled completely. The President also signed an executive order entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. At a minimum, this executive order eliminates what is considered divisive race-centered ideology from Smithsonian museums and even the National Zoo. These executive orders are not about restoring history. They are about restoring equality. They are not about bringing sanity to history, whatever that means, but they are about sanitizing history. They are about removing anything and anyone that is considered unpleasant, undesirable, or unfavorable. The list is long, but for example, on the National Park Service website about the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman's image and story were deleted, but then replaced in alter of a story. The Department of Defense removed and then restored information about Jackie Robinson's military service. Can you imagine how one-sided history will be if this order of restoring truth and sanity to American history continues? Will we only be left with stories about white people? Or more likely, only stories about white men? Right here in our public library, there's a policy that prohibits Heritage and Identity Month observances, as well as federally recognized holidays, for being the sole focus or title of the display. That being the case, you will not find a display in our public libraries dedicated to Juneteenth. That's why events like tonight and the various events sponsored by the Southwest Lafayette Juneteenth Committee throughout the week are so important. Believe me, the struggle for inclusive history is real. And tonight our panel will discuss some of the challenges and solutions to this threat. We are committed to telling it like it is, the good and the bad, the victories and the defeats, the joys and the pain. We will not let our history be erased, rewritten, or sanitized. With the executive order restoring truth and sanity to American history, the President is also seeking to reinstate monuments, memorials, and statues that glorify the Confederacy. In Lafayette, Move the Mindset worked very hard and successfully removed the statue of General Alfred Mouton that stood on public land downtown in the Triangle at Lee and Jefferson Streets. We cannot let it return to that space. In fact, the Downtown Development Authority is pursuing redeveloping the Triangle into an inviting gathering space that all Lafayette can enjoy. And Move the Mindset is working to have the redesigned space named in honor of MPM's founder, Fred Frazier. Yay. Hopefully you visited the MPM table. Hopefully you visited the MPM table and signed the petition to name the triangle Fred Frazier Unity Point. There's also an insert in your program with a petition and a scan and a code to scan. We hope that you will give your support to this effort. And I do hope that you visited all of the tables this evening, learned some local history, explored some unfamiliar topics, and became inspired to learn more. I encourage you to connect with these organizations, venues, and vendors in the upcoming weeks and months to learn more of what's available in this diverse city of ours. On the back of your program is a snapshot of the work of our organization. Move the Mindset is extremely proud of the partnership we formed with Karen Pro and the historical marker we were able to dedicate, memorializing Louis Senegal and Antoine Domain, who were identified as lynching victims by the Equal Justice Initiative. We will continue to work to have historical markers dedicated in Lafayette to memorialize Rosamond Cormier and his daughter, Rosalie, and markers in Youngsville to memorialize Ovid Belizaire and the unnamed individual. The Pathways to Partnership Coalition that we have formed to promote uniform, community-based relationships is a work in progress that we hope will be extremely beneficial to the city. We will continue our advocacy for a library program that is free, diverse, and inclusive, and for a library board of control that endorses these values. So if you would like to be a part of a grassroots, multiracial, multi-generational, diverse group committed to these ideas of racial and social justice, I invite you to join Move the Mindset. So at the end of tonight's program, I hope that you have a renewed sense of commitment to help make Lafayette a community that we can all be proud of. So braving the Louisiana weather. I don't know at the moment what's going to happen. But you did it, and we appreciate it. And hopefully you'll realize that it's really worth your time to have done it. And the goal of the contest was to encourage young people to reflect on the nation's legacy of racial injustice and to share their thoughts, emotions, and visions for a more just future. The first place winner of the contest was Alexandra Alfred for her poem, Yet Beautiful. And she was scheduled to be here tonight. I'm assuming something has happened. I've not heard from her. But if she shows later, we will certainly work her into the program because her piece was so powerful. And it is something that we want everyone to hear. And what was most impressive about it is to have a senior in high school to be able to exhibit that, the kind of passion and the complexity of the message that she presented. So I do hope that she is able to join us. So with that being said, we will then move into our film. The film that you will see is titled Juneteenth. Okay, there we go. It is a 27-minute film that chronicles the journey of our ancestors, from enslavement to freedom over multiple generations, and how they endured the fight for our rights to be. So if technology cooperates, we'll get on.
This film is a project of the Leonore Annenberg Institute for Civics of the Annenberg Public Policy Center of the University of Pennsylvania, in partnership with the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands. Citizenship is every person's highest calling. Juneteenth is a holiday that has been celebrated by Black communities in Texas for more than 150 years.
Huge parades, all-day festivals, marching bands, drum lines, dancers.
The holiday commemorates the end of slavery in the United States.
Freedom. It commemorates freedom.
In 2021, Juneteenth became our newest national holiday, thanks in part to the efforts of native Texan Bobo Lee.
Freedom is the goal for everyone, not just Black people, not just Texans. Freedom for everyone.
So what's the story of Juneteenth? In June of 1865, 2 months after the end of the Civil War, the Union Army arrived in Galveston, Texas, and freed the last enslaved people in the South.
There were 250,000 enslaved people there, waiting and waiting to see how freedom would come.
That day, June 19th, became known as Juneteenth. But the story doesn't end there, because newly freed people across the country quickly realized that freedom alone wasn't enough.
They can't vote, they can't serve on juries, they can't hold public office. So how are they going to be truly free?
Real freedom meant having rights, specifically full and equal citizenship rights.
If they're going to have any hope of equal or fair treatment, they have to be citizens.
Because as Americans, citizenship is what makes us part of the we in we the people. It gives us important legal rights and protections under the Constitution simply because we were born here. But it wasn't always that way.
Equal citizenship for all Americans was not in the original Constitution.
Many of the ideals that we now think of as absolutely fundamental to American identity actually come from the struggle against slavery, the struggle to become a better nation.
This is the story of Juneteenth, the fight to end slavery in America, and how that fight remade the Constitution to guarantee freedom and citizenship for all Americans. Okay, so to understand how we got to Juneteenth, we need to go back to the start of the Civil War. In 1861, the issue of slavery had torn the nation apart. 1 year earlier, Abraham Lincoln had been elected president after promising to stop the spread of slavery.
The South just blows up. They cannot believe that this man is in the White House who they think is going to get rid of slavery.
Now, the truth is, Lincoln had no plans to abolish slavery. He just didn't want to see it expanded into the western territories of the United States, in part because he thought it would hurt poor white workers if they had to compete with enslaved labor.
But in a bit of a hysterical overreaction, the Southerners decide their way of life is threatened. They say, we are defending slavery, and that's why we're seceding.
11 southern states seceded. That is, they broke away from the United States to create their own country, which they called the Confederate States of America. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass saw the moment as an opportunity.
Frederick Douglass was the most important black leader in the 19th century.
Born into slavery, Douglass escaped as a young man and went on to become an outspoken anti-slavery leader.
From the very beginning of the war, Frederick Douglass had been pushing Lincoln to make the ending of slavery central to the war.
Lincoln, however, resisted. He simply wanted to bring the southern states back into the Union to keep the United States of America, well, united.
Now, at the beginning of the war, Lincoln said, we are not fighting to abolish slavery. We are fighting to preserve the Union, preserve the nation.
And while Lincoln didn't support slavery, he wasn't exactly in a rush to get rid of it either.
Lincoln was more than willing there to be a gradual process by which slavery was ended. He wasn't talking about elimination of slavery overnight. He didn't think that was a good idea.
But 1 year into the war, things were not going well for the Union. They were losing a war they should have been winning, and Lincoln was forced to reconsider.
By 1862, it's clear that the war is dragging on.
White men who thought this war would be 90 days and that was it, they're losing limbs, they're losing their lives. It is a hideous war. And so people want it ended.
The Union desperately needed more soldiers.
There were many young men who didn't want to be in the service and didn't want to fight a war, period.
And from the very beginning, African Americans had told Lincoln, you armed black men, this war will be over very quickly.
Lincoln worried that Northern whites wouldn't support the idea, and he questioned whether African Americans would make good soldiers.
There were, of course, a lot of racist assumptions about the capacities of black people.
Lincoln did not have faith that black men would be brave enough to stand toe-to-toe with their former owners on the battlefield.
But black people were clamoring to join the fight. People like Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was an enslaved man working on a Confederate gunship in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Smalls was determined to secure freedom for his wife and 2 children, so a year into the Civil War, he made a plan.
One night on May 12, 1862, the captain and the 2 white crew members decided to leave the ship and went into town. So at the right time, about 2 o'clock in the morning, Robert Smalls dons the captain's hat.
And he steals the Confederate gunship.
He stops at one of the wharfs, he picks up his wife and children, and he picks up other people as well.
His plan was to deliver the ship and its precious cargo of guns and ammunition to the Union Navy, which was blockading the harbor. But first, he had to pass a series of Confederate forts.
Smalls had to make his way out of this heavily fortified, heavily occupied harbor.
There are guards there, and he's being challenged.
He knows the signs, the signals, the routines. He has studied all that.
They thought he was the white captain as the ship sails by out to join the United States Navy.
Everybody on that ship could have been killed. He took that chance with his family on board at the moment that he needed to be brave. He was.
Smalls became a big hero in the North. A group of slaves escaped right under the nose of the Confederacy.
They had believed that black men didn't have the courage or the intelligence to do that kind of thing. And Smalls showed them that they were wrong.
And Smalls wasn't the only one. Thousands of African Americans were escaping slavery and making their way to the Union lines, ready to fight. Many others were already supporting the war effort as spies, nurses, and laborers.
African Americans were utilizing their ingenuity, their talent, their intelligence, forcing and compelling President Lincoln to view them with new eyes. And certainly Lincoln is hearing this from his own generals, who are saying, look, these Black Americans are indispensable to our victory.
And he eventually realizes this is the only way I save the Union.
And so the need for Black soldiers is one of the things leading Lincoln down the road to emancipation.
Before he made it official, Lincoln decided to give the South one last chance. In September of 1862, he drafted a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation.
He drafts this preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which is a threat to the South, but also an offer. It's basically saying, if you continue to fight and we win, slavery is over. But if you lay down your arms, you can keep your slaves. We will go back to the way things were.
And had they done that, he would not have sacrificed the Union to try to free enslaved people.
The South, however, did not take the deal, and so on January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people held in rebel territory were forever free, and that they would be welcomed into the service of the U.S. military.
The Emancipation Proclamation is a military measure. It's not a measure of humanity, although Lincoln, I can guarantee you, understood what he was doing from a human perspective. But he's doing it primarily because he wants to win the war.
The proclamation didn't free everyone. It didn't apply to slave states, which had remained loyal to the Union: Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. It only applied to Confederate states, and those states were not about to listen to Lincoln.
We need to remember that the proclamation is actually a promise of freedom. It's not actual freedom until the enslaved can get to the Union lines.
All the same, the Emancipation Proclamation was incredibly significant.
The Emancipation Proclamation clearly changes the character of the war, because now the end of slavery is one of the United States' goals. This is a war for freedom.
It's like pulling the cork off and letting the genie out of the bottle. Everyone understands the new chapter is beginning.
But the most important thing about the Emancipation Proclamation is that it says Black people will be welcomed into the military service of the United States. Because that, I think, is what makes Black citizenship inevitable.
That's right. United States citizenship, which puts the we into we the people, had been denied to Black Americans by a Supreme Court ruling 3 years before the war. Let's go back for a second. In 1857, a case called Dred Scott v. Sanford was decided by the court.
Dred Scott had been taken to places where slavery was illegal by his master.
Scott believed that because he had lived in a free state and free territory, that he was automatically free.
So Scott sued for his freedom along with his wife Harriet and their 2 daughters. An opinion issued by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, the court ruled that not only was the Scott family not free, but they were not even allowed to sue for their freedom because they were not citizens of the United States.
The Supreme Court rules that no Black person can be a citizen. Citizenship is purely for white Americans.
And it is a devastating conclusion
It meant the rights and privileges guaranteed by the Constitution did not apply to African Americans.
Citizenship is really not defined in the original Constitution.
It protects the rights of citizens, but it doesn't tell us who's a citizen and who's not.
And so the court looked to settle the question by saying the founders had never intended for African Americans to be considered citizens.
They were property. They were not human beings in the sense of citizenship.
Tani said, how do we know the founders didn't want them to be citizens? One of the things was they were not permitted to serve in the military. And he said, because the military is an insignia of citizenship.
So 6 years later, in 1863, when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation allowing black men to serve in the military, it was a pretty big deal. Not only could they fight for their freedom, they could also stake a claim to citizenship rights. Now, to be clear, free blacks like Frederick Douglass had long argued that all African Americans born in the United States deserved citizenship rights. But after Dred Scott, he realized that they needed a way to claim citizenship that could not be denied.
Frederick Douglass is really a clever strategist.
He understands that there's a bargain to be struck.
He believed that if black people entered the battlefield, if they fought for the nation, then how could the nation say you're not worthy of citizenship?
Once you have black men in the uniform of the U.S. Army carrying muskets with the eagle on their shoulders, America will not be able to keep them out.
And so he not just encouraged, he begged black men to serve.
And they responded. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 black men served in the Union forces.
The impact of black soldiers on the war is actually enormous.
These black men are serving in battles. There are over 400 battles that they're in, some of them absolutely crucial.
And they suffered under horrendous conditions. Half the time they weren't paid, they weren't fed well.
Despite discrimination, unequal pay, and poor treatment, black soldiers fought bravely. And they helped to turn the tide for the Union, just as Lincoln had hoped. Their success and their sacrifice also changed his mind, and he came to support black citizenship.
He recognized the debt that the country owed to black men who had gone to war for a nation that until that point had not done anything for them except to keep them enslaved.
On April 9, 1865, after a series of big defeats, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army to Union forces, marking the end of the Civil War. The Union Army marched through the South, enforcing the Emancipation Proclamation as it went. With each stop along the way, black Americans learned they were officially free. The final holdout was Texas.
Texas is one of the areas of the Confederacy that's least touched by the U.S. Army. And people actually went to Texas hoping that they could continue to practice slavery.
The white plantation owners, many of them are fleeing Louisiana and fleeing other parts of the Confederacy and bringing along enslaved people into Texas.
And so by the time Union forces arrived in Texas, 2 months after the end of the Civil War and 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, there were still 250,000 enslaved people there. And that brings us back to Juneteenth. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger and his Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, and issued General Order No. 3, which said that all slaves are free.
This was the first proclamation that the Union Army was there to protect the freedom of the emancipated slaves in Texas.
They responded the way African Americans did all over the country. They were absolutely elated.
It was a moment of celebration. It was a moment that many people had been waiting all their lives for.
250,000 people were finally freed in Texas, and across the nation, nearly 4 million people had been emancipated.
They very quickly get to work building the world that is freedom. They move about to reunite their families. Others wanted to become educated, so they started going to makeshift schools.
People tried to consecrate marriages. Marriage was illegal for people who were enslaved.
Black Americans were claiming the rights they had long been denied.
America was supposed to be a special place, and they simply wanted to be a part of that. As people born in America and people who had contributed so much to America.
The white people had their own ideas of what black freedom meant.
Many southern states issued so-called black codes, restrictive laws designed to basically reinstate slavery under another name.
They clamped down on the free people to deny them an education, to deny them access to land.
There was violence over almost every area of life.
There were various massacres that took place in Louisiana, in Tennessee. A lot of people got killed. So it was a bloody sort of time.
Black people realized that freedom meant absolutely nothing without the right to protect one's home, to protect one's family, and that's why we're pressing for citizenship rights.
Now, remember, by the end of the war, Lincoln supported black citizenship, and most of Congress agreed with him. But just 5 days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln was assassinated. And the man who replaced him, well, let's just say he was no Lincoln.
Lincoln was succeeded by Andrew Johnson, a man who lacked all of Lincoln's qualities of greatness. He was deeply racist. In terms of political participation, he basically felt that that was still only for whites.
And so it became clear that if there were to be any hope of real freedom and equality for African Americans, that needed to be written into the Constitution. So let's stop for a second here to brush up on constitutional amendments. Amendments are changes to the Constitution. They are very different from regular old laws, which can be repealed by Congress or vetoed by a president who doesn't agree with them. President like Andrew Johnson. Now, constitutional amendments need a huge majority. They need to be passed by 2/3 of Congress and ratified by 3/4 of all states. But the president has no vote in this process. And so, as the nation tried to recover from the Civil War, a time called Reconstruction, Black Americans pushed Congress to put freedom and citizenship for all into the Constitution so that those rights would be guaranteed.
What Black people want is a new birth of American freedom and a new American republic forged in multiracial democracy.
Black conventions meet throughout the South. They draw up demands, they send petitions to Congress, they hold demonstrations.
And the result was that Congress fought for and passed 3 new amendments to the Constitution during this period: the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, what we now call the Reconstruction Amendments.
The Reconstruction Amendments are enormously important because they fundamentally change the character of our Constitution.
The 13th Amendment abolished slavery throughout the United States.
The 13th Amendment doesn't simply free people. It says slavery as a status, as a category, as a practice, is a legal matter, is unconstitutional in the United States.
Once the 13th Amendment is ratified, there is no question anymore. Every person who had been a slave in the United States is now free.
The 14th Amendment says that anyone born in the United States is a citizen of the United States and gives them those rights.
Birthright citizenship. The right to be a citizen because you were born in the country.
It reverses the Dred Scott decision. So Dred Scott says blacks can never be US citizens. The 14th Amendment says that's not true. If you're born here, no matter who your parents were, no matter how you got here, you are one of us.
And the 15th Amendment says that the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In other words, it gave black men the right to vote.
States cannot deny you the right to vote because of race. It didn't change all the other laws. The states could still deny you the right to vote because of gender, because you didn't own property, but states could no longer say only white people can vote.
Together, these amendments transformed the Constitution.
This is a sea change. It's a sea change for Black Americans who now are on new, firmer, different footing. And it transforms our idea about who belongs and how and why.
For the first time, the Constitution included this notion of equality for all.
The Reconstruction Amendments mark the promise of a new birth of freedom, citizenship that belonged to everyone. And it was that promise that African Americans began celebrating year after year on Juneteenth.
The promise of Juneteenth is this idea of ending slavery, ending racism, ending inequality, and thinking about America as this really expansive place where all things are possible for everyone.
People would dress in their Sunday best. They would wear the nicest clothes they had.
Wow, Black people love to wear good clothes and they dress to the nines.
And they would go down to the barbecue grounds. It was very much a moment of jubilee. They're playing their instruments, they're singing songs, they're dancing, they're laughing, they're eating food, and they're celebrating freedom.
Displays of dignity and citizenship are a huge part of these celebrations.
You see parades and people with floats that have beautiful flowers put on the spokes of the wheels.
Black men, former soldiers, are marching with a real regal military bearing.
African Americans were really proud to think about freedom and to embrace their freedom.
Juneteenth becomes a celebration and a commemoration, but also an opportunity to organize and uplift communities that are under siege.
Because the hard truth is that freedom continued to be denied to African Americans, even after it was enshrined in the Constitution.
Progress is not linear in American history. Progress is uneven.
As is always the case when there's progress with liberty or progress with equality, there's backlash.
And the backlash was Jim Crow. Separate drinking fountains, separate waiting rooms.
There's a rise of the Klan. There's also other racial violence.
The fire hoses and the police dogs.
Black people fighting for the right to vote.
Rights can be gained, but rights can also be taken away. It takes vigilance on the part of American citizens to make sure that what our Constitution protects is protected in reality as well as just on paper.
Today, as our nation celebrates Juneteenth, we can reflect on our history and consider how it continues to shape our society.
Juneteenth is a time of reckoning. It's the first national holiday that deals directly with the legacy of slavery.
It's an opportunity to learn about slavery and about freedom and what that means in the United States.
We owe a huge debt to the formerly enslaved and those who were part of the Reconstruction generation.
They never gave up. Even when they got their freedom, they still pushed to make citizenship work for all Americans.
Freedom belongs to all of us, not just a few. And that's why we celebrate Juneteenth.
All of us. And that's why we celebrate Juneteenth. I've watched this film several times in preparation for tonight. And each time I've watched it, I've seen something different. I've learned a new fact. And I guess the question I pose to you, not that I want you to answer or give your answer out loud, but did you hear something new? Did you hear new facts? Did you hear expanded facts? Did it change any any impressions or any ideas about what you thought was the case, but now know that that's not necessarily how it was. That is why history is so important. That is why learning history is so important. And that's why we cannot yield to those forces that try to erase and deny and sanitize. Because without the history of who we are, where we come from, those people who have fought alongside of us, many myths and misconceptions might still exist. So it is incumbent upon us to be sure that we know the facts, we know the history, and that we are willing to share that wherever that occasion arises. And because the struggle is ongoing, that is why we have a panel tonight that will talk about that struggle and make the segue of learning what happened with Juneteenth and the freedom that occurred there, the delayed freedom that occurred there, and how it impacts and connects to where we are today. So at this time, I will turn the mic over to Reginald Lamel, my fellow MTM member, and invite our panelists to take the platform. And there we go. And I'm looking around as I'm speaking, and I don't think that Alexandra has arrived. So I just wanted to double check. Okay.
So hello everybody. Thank you guys for coming to our program this evening. I know it's a work week night, but we appreciate you participating with us. As our panelists walk up here, I do want to highlight something for you, and I want to draw our attention in. I know we watched the film for about 27 minutes, but let's get our little heart pumping real quick for a second. If you're sitting next to a kid, I want you to look at him. If you don't have a kid at your table, look at the back of the room. Lots of kids sitting there. I am a therapist. I help kids and I help adults too. So if you don't know what to do with yourself on any celebration of Juneteenth, or you don't know what to do on any given day, find the child and be kind. The things that we do today, the things that we're learning about today, our beautiful panelists that are here today, they're not speaking just for us, but they're speaking for the kids that are going to come behind us. And I think that that's important. They'll be flying through our wake as we make waves for them. And if we don't do that, these events, these things that we talk about will be few and far between, and they'll be gone for good. Why do I deserve to be up here? I think I need to explain, because when I read you what these ladies have done, you'll be impressed. So I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm the death and dying and suicide guy, right? I work here locally. I involve myself as much as I can. There's a lot going on in our communities. If you're not active, let me tell you, there's a lot going on that you can get involved in. We have the tables on your left side, my left side, and in the back as well. But kids, concentrate on the kids. If you can't find something to do, find a child to be kind to and teach them some things they may not know. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Hope that wasn't too confusing. We have Ms. Shaylin Woods, she's the director of the Ernest J. Gaines Center and an associate professor at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Professionally, Ms. Woods is focused on the documentation, discussion, and preservation of Black life in the South and its many intersections. If you have not introduced a child to an Ernest J. Gaines book, I think that that's something that we're missing out on. They used to be assigned readings when I was a kid in school. Ms. Ruth Anita Foote is an award-winning journalist, historian, writer, and online entrepreneur who believes in the power of words to shape our world. Ms. Ruth holds a master's degree in history from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Her thesis, just as brutal but without all the fanfare, African American students, racism, and defiance during the desegregation of Southwestern Louisiana Institute from 1954 to 1964. And those of you who may not recognize it, but Southwestern Louisiana Institute is UL Lafayette. Ms. Ruth has served as editor and co-publisher of Creole Magazine. She writes for The Current, which is a newspaper. We also have Ms. Erica Fox. She is a local griot, community advocate, and professional singer with over 40 commercial recordings. She has performed on stages throughout the country, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the National World War II Museum. She is the owner of the Attack-a-Paw Collective, a BIPOC creator space, and the founder of Lafayette's first African American cultural museum, Maison Creole de Freetown. These are our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? So when I was younger and I used to sit in the crowd, I would listen to the long list of things that people accomplished. It always baffled me why we had to go through that list. But the reason for that is not only to give you some insight into how much hard work that they put into what they do, but also the reason why we should give them an ear to lean in and listen. Because they have some backgrounds that some of us, including me, who may not have specific detailed information on. So we have some questions that we're going to go into, and all of this is in regards to the film that we just watched, and hopefully we will have some opportunity for questions and answers. And I'm not on my phone texting anybody, I'm looking for a timer. I can be a modem of the times, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. Okay. You guys can volunteer who would like to go first, but my first question is, how does the delayed notification of freedom in Texas mirror contemporary concerns about who controls the historical narratives and access to information? We got a hand on the end.
Before I answer that question, I would like, first of all, I was very impressed with the documentary and the way the documentary, this is going to tie my answer, counters what's known as the master narrative. A master narrative is the story we've all been told about history. And fun fact about me, since I was a child, I have had issues with the myth of Abraham Lincoln and his politics. So I would like to encourage everyone to look up a documentary called Abraham Lincoln, which is a series of episodes that now can be streamed on. It's the History Channel made it. It's one of the last really good history-centric things they did, and after the aliens. But you can stream it on Amazon Prime. You have a subscription. You can go to the History Channel website and watch it. Sling TV, all those things, and YouTube Premium. But we're thinking about what a master narrative is, right? The way we understand Juneteenth, the way we understand history, the way we understand Abraham Lincoln, what slavery was. The documentary did a great job at the beginning stating that he was not interested in ending slavery. He was interested in preventing slavery from spreading to the western frontier. He was willing to compromise slavery, enslaved people, chattel slavery, which is different than any other form of slavery in history at this point, saying you can keep your slavery as long as you don't fight us, which had nothing to do with his concern for the enslaved Black people. African Americans have shown that they deserve citizenship long before the Civil War. Long before the Civil War. They have been active in American history. They have been active in wars. They were part of the Revolutionary War. They were part of the French and Indian War. They had shown their bravery. They had shown their intelligence. They had done all that work, and yet still, it was, do they deserve freedom? And what we see today is not, do they deserve freedom? It's, do they deserve kindness? When I have a 2-year-old, so talking about children really touches me, and I remember This is a tangible note. I promise I'll tell you. I remember when he turned 1, I cried. Because for me, that was the death of my child's childhood. For me, that meant my son. That meant I had to now figure out how to parent my child different. Because it was no longer a cute little baby who could run around and say and do and act however. Like, oh, that's so sweet. No, I had to be harder on my baby because the world was going to be harder on him. And that's something that is where we're at now. So we have things happening in the world like murders and assault or poverty and things like that. And the way Black people are treated through those things, right? The way they are penalized and villainized for the ways in which they have been victimized matters. We're talking about what citizenship is and civilized behavior is, right? So, I'm sorry. The second half of the question, I forgot.
So, I think you got the mirror part down. You got the mirroring part down, I think, with the fact that you talked about your son, right? How does the delayed notification of freedom in Texas mirror the contemporary or current concerns about who controls the historical narratives?
That's the master narrative. When they tell you someone is violent and they generalize it, right? Right now the narrative around Black people has not gone away, it's just shifted, right? We're not hearing so much about the violence of Black men, the promiscuity of Black women, the hyper, adultness of children. We're hearing about illegals, right? We're hearing about the drug dealers. We're hearing about the rapists and all this other stuff that are coming here to destroy the country. It's the same thing. It's the way that they are controlling the narrative to shape the country in their image that is not really reflective of what we all need. And that denial of freedom in Texas, because Texas said, we surrendered, I didn't surrender. That's what Texas said. They said, you speak for yourself, don't speak for me. Come get it, come take us, we're still fighting. And so many people went to Texas to still fight in Texas, right? Because it wasn't about civility, it wasn't about citizenship, it was about money. They didn't want to give up their money. They didn't want to give up that power. Think about it. Why would you hire somebody and you can enslave people and their children forever? Why would you pay somebody? Why would you do that? How does that make sense from a business perspective? Right? So when they get to change the narrative and they get to weaponize people's fear and insecurities and their desperation because they are impoverished and turn everybody against each other, they still win. The establishment still wins and gets to maintain the culture that they want. It doesn't help us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
I just found myself while I was watching the film, it's like history, that is the main thing about history. It's an ongoing learning process. And I remember as I was listening to Captain, I'm going to call him Captain Smalls, when he took and commandeered that boat, I just wanted to say, bravo, bravo, you go with your bad self. You know, I was just like, which one of us could have had the guts to do that? And yet the price they paid, we stand on their shoulders today. And of course, just like Shaylin said, when you control the narrative, you really control people's life because you keep them ignorant. And just watching that, I learned so many things that I never, first of all, like to say, Abraham Lincoln's been getting too much credit. And we've been cheering him on a little bit too much. And it was just like when I did my thesis, before the narrative was, when the university desegregated, was that at least we weren't like Open Miss, which came years later. Nobody was shot and killed on campus. And the title comes from one of the students that I interviewed, and many of you may know him, Dr. James Taye. he rose to become not only one of the vice presidents, but he rose to become the head of the University of Louisiana's Board of Regents. And he said, even though we didn't go through what Ole Miss did, it was just as brutal, but without all the fanfare. And someone accused in one of my infamous negative 0 or 1 reviews on Amazon, they accused me of sensationalizing the topic. Well, how can you sensationalize a topic from what one of the students who went there themselves and experienced? How can you do that? But it is so important that we tell stories, that we learn about Abraham Lincoln, and what we're all trying to do in our own spaces, like Shaylin with the Ernest Gaines Center, Erica with Maison Freetown. If we don't document the narrative, if we don't become the narrative, then we can't pass it on. And one of the things that stuck in my mind about the documentary was citizenship. It did not, just because it was ordained did not mean it became citizenship. And that just kind of reminded me, just because the university desegregated, it didn't mean it was desegregated for the black students. And some of the things they went through is like they had to eat within their little bus, because the student union was off limits, the cafeteria was off limits, they had to sit in the back of the class, the professors were cruel. But in spite of all of them, just like all the people we saw in the documentary, they held their ground. And that was, I think, the biggest takeaway that I had for those that I interviewed, was that despite everything that they went through, and because of them, we stand on their shoulders, including Helma Constantine, who inspired me to do that as a thesis. She put a bullseye not only on her, but her own child, because the lawsuit became known as Constantine versus SLI, and Constantine was her daughter, Clara. She was one of 4 plaintiffs whose name went down on the actual lawsuit. And a lot of the narrative that was told was that we were the first school to desegregate. But the university went kicking and screaming. That part was left off. And they only desegregated because they lost in court and they were ruled against. But I also like to tell the story because part of the narrative, from going back to slavery and beyond, is the fact that when God gives you 2 people that fight against you, He also gives you 20 that are for you. And that is what we have to remember, whether they're the abolitionists or the professors who risk or the capitalist center, who finally allowed the students to have a safe haven where they could gather. Before they ate on their bus, they did this on the bus. That was their little student union, the school bus that brought them to campus and back. And they were treated harshly. And yet those students did not let anything stop them. And what I admired the most about them, they lived their lives. And so many of us don't do that. Something stops us and we're like, oh my God, the world is ending. Oh Lord, I gotta go run hide under the covers. I don't want to see tomorrow right now. But those students kept going. They were denied the intramural sports. They had their own. They socialized in their own neighborhoods. They did their own thing. And they didn't let the rest of the world get to them. And that's what I admire about, because so often people give up. They kept going. And because they went, we can go. And because of the professors who reached out to them and helped them, they were able to succeed against great odds. But when you hide that narrative from people, you're hiding such a vital part of their life. And even today, with what Ola was talking about, and what Shaylin and what Erica was saying, when you keep that narrative hidden, and that's what they're doing by removing things and rewriting. What do you mean Harriet Tubman can not exist without the underground. Those are synonymous, you know. But if people are allowed to. So I say our challenge today and every day is to keep that legacy alive and make sure you're passing it on to the other generation. You know, we're kind of beyond our years young. We're just learning about things in that documentary. And those things that I saw in that documentary, you better believe I'm going to share them with others. And we do that all in our own space. And I challenge you to do the same, you know, with your grandchildren and with yourself. You know, find out about the history of your parents because it begins in your own home.
So, what I heard you say was Captain Smalls saw a door open, he took an opportunity.
Yes.
Correct? If you're paying attention to the door, or you're paying attention for opportunities to open up to you, all you have to do is step through. Does it take courage? Yes. Is it easy? No. But we have to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. We have to stay ready. The other thing that I heard you say, and I just left my mind, so I forgot, so I'm gonna skip it. Literally that fast. So, Ms. Erica, I'm gonna skip off to the next question, but if you have something you want to input there, that's quite all right. What parallels exist between post-Civil War attempts to limit Black advancement and current challenges to DEI initiatives? What parallels exist between post-Civil War attempts to limit Black advancement and current challenges to DEI initiatives? DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, first of all, thanks for giving me that hard question. But I think I can tackle it. First, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak on this panel. I've had the privilege and honor to work with both of these wonderful women, and to piggyback off what you said, for every 10 that try to go against you, God brings 20. These are at least 2 of the 20 right here. They have been instrumental in the development of what we have been trying to create with the African American History Museum in Lafayette. So, going back to Civil War, I have to be honest, I call myself the reluctant curator because I am an artist, a singer, a memory keeper, a storyteller, but I knew nothing about creating a museum. I loved history and loved to learn about the past, but I feel like we, as a museum, had our own Juneteenth experience, the delayed freedom of being able to tell our own stories here within our own community. I moved away to go to college in Los Angeles, but every time I would come back home for breaks, I just felt like I wasn't seeing enough representation. And it didn't necessarily have to be African American or Creole. I didn't see the Korean Center or the Vietnamese arts, space. And I got tired of asking for permission to exist. I got tired of asking people that I thought had the opportunity, the resources, and the wherewithal to create these types of spaces, and pretty much took it upon myself to do it. And so in a large way, when I think about Civil War and those that were willing to give up their lives, like Mr. Smalls and his family and his legacy, to fight for something he believed in, I think we're still doing that today in a large part. When I watched the film and they broke down all the various amendments, I knew it to a certain extent, but 50 hit me because I was like, man, I still wouldn't have been able to vote because I'm female, and even Black men who didn't own land, they couldn't either. So it's just crazy to see how we're still fighting, and I think it's important for us to not only preserve those legacies, but to continue to provide space for those legacies to live. That's why we created a museum, because we wanted to be a repository, because here, 100 years later, just a little bit over, we are fighting that same battle. That mirror is here, right in front of our faces again, and we are talking citizenship. We are talking about the right to exist. So I think we've come a long way, but needless to say, we've got a long way to go.
me was the audacity of trying to see whether or not the black men could actually serve in the Army. Like, we had to almost prove ourselves. Like, oh, well, can they do that? And it just reminded me of something else that in my research that I came across, and I kept hearing throughout the research, starting with Frederick Douglass, what does the black man want? And that was his speech that he gave to his supporters. And Frederick Douglass, like when I say God brings you different people, Frederick Douglass was able to go around because he was underwritten by rich people. And so he was able to get around and give those speeches. So we always have to be grateful for those who came. Like, to do this research, I stood on the shoulders of people who were brave to share their stories, and others who had documented before me. But I remember I kept coming across that question, what does the black man want? And then the NAACP years later, they wrote a plank, like 12, 14, I think it had 14 planks. What does the Negro want? Then later in research, I kept coming across it so much that I ended up doing a paper and presenting it at the history conference. Because it was the case of, why do we even need to ask that question? We're not aliens. What do you mean, what do we want? We want the same thing that every other person wants. And I think we see that issue today with the immigrants. What do you mean, what do the immigrants want? No, they didn't come over here to steal or break jobs or anything. They want the same thing everybody else wants, a better life for their children. And that is the question that's going to continue to haunt us until we do something about it. So it's not the case that you got to be confused and why are they here? No, they didn't risk their life to cross the border or go this and that just because they thought, oh, let me steal that guy's job. I saw him on TV and I joined him. No, they were hoping, they risked their lives. You hear so many horror stories about, 200 of them killed in the back of a truck because of the heat, and they're suffering just to try to get their families. That's what the slaves endured. And another, back to your narrative, I remember my cousin Lloyd, and many of you may remember him. He was the principal of Paul Brook. And I remember him saying he had served and he became so disgusted with serving in World War II that when he got home, he threw away his uniform. And he said that when you talk about controlling the narrative, he said the movies that came out with General Patton showing him winning and his victories and all the white soldiers, he said, no, those were black soldiers with General Patton. So that goes to everybody watching that movie is thinking, oh, bravo, bravo, never realizing those troops surrounding Patton were really African Americans. So that's controlling the narrative. When you get missed stories and things are given, you have to look at it with a grain of salt. And you just really, to tell the truth, you have to judge it with common sense. A lot of times, that doesn't feel right. 9 out of 10, not,
Lean into your gut feeling. If it's not, it's not there, it doesn't work. So one of the things I'll say is, if you haven't read the speech by Frederick Douglass, the July 4th Independence Day speech, you are sorely missing out on something. And when you read it, you need to understand the time that he wrote it in. Like, this man was extremely intelligent, and the words that he utilized at that time where he existed was strictly a dangerous task in and of itself. So I'm going to go with the DEI question really quickly, because I served on a DEI board with the previous job that I worked for. And the reason they created it was in the fallout of the after effects of George Floyd. When I was asked to be a part of the DEI group, the first thing that I asked was, are these sessions going to be recorded? So the CEO asked, why did you ask that question? And the answer is no. And the reason I said that was, you will not get an authentic or truthful answer from me if you're recording this, because this is something that you can hold against me later on. And if you want honesty, then I suggest you not do that. So one of the things that I'll share about DEI and what the reason that it is extremely important, and I'll give you this specific example, talking about stories, right? So I share through stories. That's what I know how to do. So in that meeting, they asked, we were talking about some things, and one of the things he asked was, what are the things that you go above and beyond to do that we may see as something like typical? So when I send emails out, and they're supposed to be professional emails, I am one of the individuals who has to go over it 3, 4, 5 times. I want to make sure I don't come across angry. I want to make sure that I don't come across unprofessional, and that all my words are the way they should be, right? One of the things when I walked away from the company, and I was at my last DEI meeting, that he told me impacted him, and I was on that DEI group for 3 years, that what's going to stick with him was that email. Tall white guy, glasses, blonde hair, blue eyes, no issues. He said, anytime I send an email, I never have to review it the way that you described that you have to review your emails. How sad for you that that's the truth. It's the society that we've created. Ms. Ruth talked about sensationalizing stories. We don't sensationalize anything. I'm telling you how it is. They get tired of hearing our stories over and over again. So to the white counterparts that are here, your voices are needed. They're tired of hearing us. If you don't stand up with us or alone by yourselves in a room, when you hear the stuff come up, if you don't speak up, it doesn't get heard, falls on deaf ears. They're tired of us yelling and screaming, but I'm not gonna stop. My mom didn't raise me that way. She died when I was 10 years old, and before she died, I was on picket lines, I was on a march. Last year, I found out me and Ms. Ruth occupied the same space. I was a kid, and she was on the same march that I was on. Hell, she might have even met my mom. Sorry about that, I said.
Brad, you just reminded me of something when you talked about having to check your email. A lot of people don't realize that African Americans, we always have to make sure we cross the T, dot the I even better. And it reminds me about years ago when I say USL because that's what it was back then. And I remember when we went for student aid funding that you had to sign up to who you wanted to see. And I remember all the black students were signing up to see the white guy. And the head of the finance department was African American, and nobody was signing up. And finally, they had to lose some of us off back the bloods to the other. And the reason where, as I grew older, I was able to look back at it with a different viewpoint. But I remember at the time the white student said, well, golly, he's acting like the money is his and he won't give you money for your books. But I remember the white guy, one of my friends told me, he said, God, he was throwing money at me. It was like if I would have said, I need to buy a car, he would have said it. And later I realized the reason why the black guy was stricter, even though he was the head of the department, was because his eyes were being dotted, and he was going to be looked at in a stricter manner than the white guy who haphazardly said, you need it for this, you need it for that. And I remember the person saying, like, shoot, I should have told him I wanted a car, the way he was throwing it. You sure you don't need nothing else? And then when you went to the black guy, it was like, well, you're just going to have to wait till you get your first student aid paycheck. And you're like, but I need to read that chapter to next week. You know, and then and at the time we were just kind of like, well, we're signing up for the guy who's giving away the money. But we didn't realize the pressure that the black administrator was on. He was going to, everything he did that day was going to be checked and double checked, and he might have got written up for it, where the other guy could carelessly get, it wasn't his money, he could throw it away.
Michelle.
Well, to that point, the guy you guys all wanted to see was not in charge of the department. So it was going to be the other guy who told him no. He was never going to be the bad guy in y'all eyes.
So we all got the money. That was the point.
Because the person who runs the department was like, this will work. He didn't have to tell you no in that moment. If he did say no, it was never on that guy's fault. It's not his fault. And I work with a lot of students. I don't grade because that's not part of my job. I don't grade. They are nicer to me than they are to the teachers who grade. I I promise you, they are so much nicer and more respectful to me, because I'm not giving them a grade. But the faculty who are working just as hard for them as I am, they are going to the dean, they're going to the department head, they're going to the president, how dare you? So what? I didn't do the readings for the whole semester, how dare you give me a C? Girl, I got a C, you passed. I can tell them that, you won't pray for a C, they're like, okay, thank you, Ms. Lewis. But to answer your question about the parallels, I don't see a parallel because for there to be a parallel, there had to be a shift. There are still Reconstruction era laws on the books. Those laws have not been repealed, right? So there cannot be a parallel when those laws are still enacted. When we don't see lynchings like we used to, right? It's not okay. There'll be conversations about miscarriages of justice against Black and brown communities, but my question is, do they go past conversations? So there's also that, thinking about that. There can't be a parallel that hasn't been an actual shift. We're not repeating anything, we're continuing the same legacy that was enacted during Reconstruction. Because fun fact, there were supposed to be rules, and there were supposed to be things former Confederate states had to do to rejoin the Union. What happened to those? Were they followed? Why not? I'm not asking you guys to ask that question, I'm asking that for you to think about it, right? Because this is important when it comes to history, understanding, and knowledge. We stop asking why. We have started refusing to allow people to ask why, and ask why. Ask why, ask why, ask why. Look for that information, right? Research is hard. Research is really hard, it's very overwhelming. I have a master's degree in it, you have to have a master's degree. Fun fact, you have to have a master's degree to be a librarian. Or to be an archivist, you have to go to grad school and pay extra money. A lot of money to get this degree to help people understand how to find information and understand how to do research, right? We have a terminal degree, a library science degree is a terminal degree. It is akin to a PhD. It is as high as I can get a PhD in library science, but why? Just for me to teach library science, I don't really want to do. So utilize your libraries, right? Utilize your libraries. Go to the public library. Also go and support them and help them. Like, build their stats. Go. It is, fun fact, you don't have to check out a book. Just move books around. Because we count that. Like, it sounds silly, right? It shows interest. It shows engagement. Go move the books around.
And take your kid with you.
Just move them around, because when it comes to collection development, they need those numbers to justify. Because unfortunately, we have to justify. And I'm gonna do a plug. You guys are here. Check out the game center table in the back of the room there. My friend Jordan, our friend Marissa, who's
You little flirty in the back.
we have the Map to Black Studies, which has over 700 books in it, right? We want those books to be accessible to the general public. If you would like to access those books, right, please send me an email saying that, so I can get those numbers, so I can go to my boss and be like, hey, you know, it costs $100 for general public, non-UL affiliated people to get circulating privileges from our library. Can we do something about that? Because look at all the people who would love to use the Ernest J. Gaines collection. So just shoot me an email saying, I would love to use this, but I can't. So I have that data, right? So I can show my employer that you guys care about these things, that you want access to these things. So I can justify programming around these things, so we can continue to push against the master narrative to create a history, to share a history that is inclusive of everybody. Black, white, rich, poor, male, female, everybody. We all play a role in what this country is and what this country will continue to be. The stories are there. They just don't want you to read them. We got the books. Over 700 books.
So to reinforce what Ms. Shaylin said, if you go to the library, take a kid with you is what I said.
Yes.
Take a child with you. One of the things my mom told me when I was a kid is, one of the old sayings was that if you don't want an N-word to know something, stick it in a book, because N-words don't read, right? She was raised in a time when she was the youngest of 12, and she was the only one that graduated from high school. So take a child to the library. It's an important thing. I didn't know the specifics of them actually tracking books. It's important that we keep those things moving in order for those stories to stay alive. Word of mouth isn't the only thing that'll keep this moving. There's also been a movement for a library on the north side as well. So when those things occur and those things happen, we need to make sure that we're walking through those doors, getting those numbers up, and making sure that we can continue to educate the kids that are coming before us. A lot of them have left, but there's a lot of kids that are clueless, right? When you have a moment with a child, sit and speak to them about the past, the history, the good, bad, and the ugly. It's important. I do want to get some more words from Ms. Erica Fox. So we're going to close out with this question because we're way over time. But I do appreciate you guys' patience in being, allowing us the opportunity to speak to you and speak with you. Not at you or to you, but speak with you. I did want to say this. I disagree with the word why. As a therapist, we're trained not to ask why. Change the why. That's how you get a different response. What inspired y'all to remove these books from you? What was the purpose behind it? Right? You want to turn something negative into a positive? Ask them what was the inspiration behind it. What inspired you to kill our stories? Right? It's a reframe. It's amazing. So I just want to shift it. Don't ask why. Because when you think about a relationship or anybody you've been in an intense conversation with, when you ask why, did you actually get the answer? Or did you come up with another question? You came up with another question. Get them to shift in their heads, right? Those are the people we need to change, not the ones in this room. If somebody has something off color to say, ask them what was funny about that. They dropped the N-word and they shouldn't be doing it. What inspired you to say that? That's not okay. I don't like that. No is a full statement as well. Ms. Fox, so based off the fact that you do have the Creole, the Freetown. It was on the paper, I couldn't remember it by heart. How have marginalized communities historically preserved their stories when excluded from official historical records? And I asked you that question because I'm assuming that's what you guys do there as well, right?
Correct. Well, one way that we are doing it, along with the community, is collecting oral narratives from the voicing and the perspective, first person perspective. Actually, Ruth was one of the original members helping us to secure those stories. And it grew from 40 to over 400 stories collected within our, I think it's 8 parishes, and now they're archived in the Library of Congress. So you can actually go on to the Library of Congress and hear stories of local people. I think it's important that we don't just celebrate and learn about what happened up north or down south, but what happened in your own backyards. And we even see how it affects young people. I think we still have one in the room when they do come to our space and see information and history that is local. You know, they resonate, it resonates, they light up. So I think that's one way that we've been working with the community, collecting stories, going on, knocking on people's doors, going on their front porches. I think Milton Arsenault in the back, who's acting like he don't hear, actually helped us as well to collect some even video footage of some of our elders in the community who now, unfortunately, have passed on. So some of those stories now are archival legacies that we can go back and, look at, learn from. So I think it just happens within your own household, honestly. Like, we are the space where you all can come and drop off a picture of your, grandmother, or a story, or a plaque, or a quilt, or what have you, and we are the holding space, but it really starts within the house.
Thank you.
I'd also like to say literature. Literature is a way people of color always preserve their stories. They write it, they do fiction. They have to do it as fiction a lot of times because it's not safe to do it as nonfiction. Literature, music, dance, plays, folklore. We always do it. We learn. We do it. We still do it. Masking. We mask all the time. Now they just call it code switching. It was called masking before it was that. We know everybody's heard the story of Burr Rabbit, right? Or has at least heard reference to Burr Rabbit. That's a trickster tale that's come back from Africa. The stories are never lost. Information is never lost. You pass it down however we deem fit to pass it down. Because I want to be very clear when it comes to marginalized folks in general. You do not have to preserve things the way the establishment says you have to preserve it. You actually don't have to preserve anything you don't want to. If you want to let your tradition die, they are your tradition, then you have the right to do so. But understand there are spaces that want to help you. And you dictate how they help you. They don't dictate to you how they help you. And that's really important when we're talking about preservation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. Speaking of local stories, I mentioned this last year, and we do have some tables, I think, for voters' rights and things like that, maybe. Yeah. One of the largest massacres in U.S. history happened in Opelousas. How many of you knew about that? The Opelousas massacre? And it was based off black men, like myself and the other gentleman in here, attempting to vote, right? Murdered for voting rights. And I think these are the stories we need to look up and tell. They're ugly, but kids need to know about these things as well. I'm assuming that these kids go and they hear last names that are similar to theirs, or friends of theirs, and then they hear those stories and they're like, oh my God, I know somebody with that last name.
That was our main goal. One was memory keeping, because we were seeing an outward, without being like too political, there was almost an intentional, you've probably seen it with the university, act to hide some of our information, our documents. So being the rebellious type, and the museum and Ernest J. Gates Center, these are places that could be seen as spaces of resistance, honestly. Just, you know, the fact that these spaces were not designed to be there. There are people and factions that truly do not want these spaces to exist. Even our story, it's taken 14 years. That's why I say I feel like we've had a Juneteenth experience, because our story as a space has been delayed for over 14 years because there were really people trying to stop us from being in existence. So yes, to your point, for a fact, I love highlighting the Greens, the Kinchins, the people that we know in our community and heard from, say, our grandparents telling stories about people in our community. Those stories have to continue to live on, and we want to be a space where those stories do live on. They love hearing their own last names. They love knowing that, wait, my mom did what? Because a lot of times young people, they don't really care to learn the stories until it matters later on when they get older. So yeah, it's really cool to see some of those young people hear stories that really truly impact them because it's about them.
So I do want to piggyback right off of that real quick. So if you want a kid to learn about who you are and what you know and what you have, we have to create the space for it. A lot of kids don't feel like they can occupy. A lot of kids that I see don't feel like there's a safe space with adults because of their experiences with past adults, right? It may not be you, but it may be somebody else. And why would I sit and listen to your story if I don't feel safe with you, right? So creating that space and giving them the opportunity, like Captain Smalls had, and let them walk through the door. But if you try to force them through it, it's anti-therapeutic if I do it in my rooms. So I don't think that it's very positive if you do it in your personal life with the children you have contact with. So be patient with them, but and also make sure that they are age appropriate. Kids, just a FYI, their brain is fully developed at the age of 25. They cannot make sound decisions before the age of 25. So if you are criticizing and ridiculing a child for making a child's decision at the age of 13 and 14, you are doing them a disservice, especially black children. We know that they have to, like Ms. Shaylin said earlier, we have to raise our black boys and girls differently. However, they still need to be allowed a safe space to be children, to be able to play, but still warn them about the things that happen outside of the doors of your safe home. I do want to say this. These are three. I grew up in a home with very strong black women, right? And one of the American narratives, and I'm a dad of 3 daughters, 25, 24, and 31. And I've told them since they were little, the American narrative has put the black woman at the bottom of the totem pole since the beginning. And you have had to fight, scratch, and crawl out of that hole, and they're still willing to put you there. But we have 3 strong women who have fought in this community to get things done and taken care of for our youth. I met one of them in my youth and wasn't aware of it. And then Ms. Shalin with Ernest J. Gaines. I've read a lot of his books, so I think that that's amazing as well. So I think Ms. Ruth Foote has something to say, but I do want to kind of close it out, and I'll let her have a closing word. But please, give them a round of applause for taking the